everybody. Welcome to a brand new season of Rehash, a Web3 podcast. I'm your host, Diana Chen, and today we are debuting season 8 with a guest who's a good friend of mine and a past guest of mine from a non-crypto podcast I hosted way back in 2020 before I joined the crypto space. Today we have Jonah Erlich, co-founder of Den, joining us to talk all things multisigs, what a multisignature wallet is, how it's different from MPC, multi-party computation, best security practices for managing a multisig, and how to be a good multisig signer. I remember joining my first Gnosis Safe multisig back in early 2021 and being afraid to create and execute certain transactions because I wasn't sure I had set them up properly or what would happen once I hit sign and execute. I also remember running into coordination problems, like not being able to get a hold of certain people to sign transactions to reach our minimum signer threshold. Or on the flip side of that, everyone rushing to sign the transaction so they wouldn't be the last person left to execute and pay the exorbitantly high gas prices to do so on Ethereum mainnet. I know these are not unique challenges that I faced, and pretty much anyone I've spoken to who has been part of a multisig has faced some of the same challenges and many more on top of what I've shared. Our guest today, Jonah, experienced many of these challenges himself while operating as a core team member of Constitution DAO back in late 2022, which is what inspired him to build Den, a tool that helps teams operate more quickly, safely, and effectively on-chain through things like human-readable descriptions, notifications, recurring transactions, and much more, which Jonah shares more about in this episode. As a quick disclaimer, I am a very small angel investor in Den and a user of Den myself, so I do have some higher level knowledge of Den than I typically would of most projects I host on the pod. Finally, on this episode, Jonah and I wrap up with a few Can You Nots, where we share some of our biggest pet peeves about things multisig signers or people operating in crypto in general like to do. And Jonah overdelivers on his campaign promise to tell an embarrassing childhood story about me on my podcast by telling not one, but 2 embarrassing childhood stories about me. So stay tuned for that. Jonah was nominated by DeFi Beats and voted onto the podcast by David Phelps, DeFi Beats, Ravi Bakai, Maya Bakai, Burb, Feems, Ninty Nick, Jimmy Chain, Frisian, Spencer Graham, Aaron Soskin, Andy Boyan, and myself, Diana Chen. So without further ado, here is my conversation with Jonah. What's up, Jonah? How are you doing today?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. Excited for our first episode of season 8. You know, it's wild that we're on season 8 already. And I was just telling people that if they missed all the drama that went down with elections, they can go check out the pinned tweet on our Twitter page and, you know, go look at the actual joke race itself to see all the Onchain votes and stuff like that.
Definitely. Yeah, it is crazy. I remember when you started Rehash, and I can't believe it's on season 8 already. The election process was fun more than anything else. You know, I just really enjoyed like getting into the game of it, like trying to reach out to people I knew that had voting power, posting on Twitter, making bold campaign promises to embarrass you live on your podcast. It was a great time. So I'm excited to actually be on the show.
So for anyone who missed it, Jonah, this was Jonah's, I believe, 3rd time being nominated for Rehash, which 3rd time's a charm, as they say. And this time Jonah was like, I cannot let myself get nominated again and not voted on because it's just been too much. And so he came up with this whole campaign strategy. But basically the campaign he ran on and won on was that he promised everybody an embarrassing childhood story about me because Jonah is good friends with my sister. That's how we originally met. And so, you know, obviously sisters love to dish embarrassing stories about each other. So we're going to save that for the very end. I'm still not 100% sure that you've got one. I can't tell if I'm supposed to be calling your bluff or not, but we'll save it for the end. See if you actually have an embarrassing story about me. So you will have to sit through this whole thing and tune until the end. Also, if you're on the live stream right now, good for you, because if it's really bad, this is my podcast and I can cut it from the podcast. So you may or may not be hearing this if you're listening on Apple or Spotify or YouTube after the fact. But if you're on the live stream today, right now, you'll definitely be getting it at the end of the hour.
There we go. And if it does get cut, I might need to figure out some other way to share it with the world, just because everyone needs to know, Diana, about your past, the truth, what actually happened.
The truth. Oh man, now you're getting me even more nervous. Oh man, I'm nervous for this. Also, fun fact, Jonah and I have actually recorded a podcast together before. Before I got into crypto back in, I think this was back in 2020, I had a startup podcast, like just about Web2 startups. And Jonah at the time was working at Bubble, a no code solution. I thought that would be perfect to bring him on and talk about no code solutions and his work there as an engineer. And then now it's what, 3-4 years later, we're reunited on Rehash. We've both gotten into crypto, talking about crypto stuff. So super excited to have you on, Jonah, today. I feel like we've come full circle.
Yeah, super excited. Definitely feels like we've come full circle, like we're much closer friends than we were back at that point. So I feel comfortable campaigning on a promise of embarrassing you. And, just I think have built up our own brands in the space as well since then. So I think this one's going to get a lot more traction. Not that the other podcast wasn't getting traction, but I think we're going to spread the message a little further this time.
100%. 100%. So today we're going to be talking about all things multisigs and what I'm going to call multi-partying on chain. So anyone, whether you're part of a team, an organization, just a group of friends, if you are doing things on chain together, then this conversation is going to be relevant to you. And most people I know that are in crypto today are operating in some way on chain with friends or with their organization or with a team. Or we're going to do a deep dive into multisigs and then talk about your company, Den, a little bit as well and give people a better understanding of that. So I want to start off with just the very, very basics for anyone tuning in who's maybe new to crypto or new to multisigs. Can you start by just telling us what is a multisig or a multi-signature wallet?
Totally. Happy to dive into what a multi-signature wallet is. So at a high level, let's start with what a wallet is, which a wallet is somewhere where you can store assets on chain, where folks can send you assets, where you can interact with smart contracts. And you can do all of that as an individual. It only requires you as one person to sign off on that transaction individually. A multi-signature wallet is a type of a smart account or a smart wallet where it's a smart contract, and that smart contract is controlled by multiple individual wallets. So let's say me and Diana's sister Hope, who supplied us with this story, we're all signers on a multi-signature wallet. We could have a rule that 2 of the 3 of us could sign transactions and then they would execute. So if we wanted to trade a token or buy an NFT or pay someone, then if me and Diana just signed off on those things, that transaction would execute, which gives you a little bit more security and allows you to collaborate as a team on chain. Multi-signature wallets are just one type of the smart wallet or smart account type of wallet that's really starting to grow in popularity. Multi-signature wallets are really the first one, and especially for where the area in crypto where Den operates, the most common in terms of smart accounts and smart wallets. There's a lot of work on the consumer side, which is focused on other types of smart accounts. But for teams, multi-signature wallets are really still the tried and true.
And when we say smart wallets, are we talking about smart contract wallets as opposed to an EOA, for instance?
Exactly.
And what are what are the differences between an EOA and a smart contract wallet?
Great question. So an EOA is just a wallet that you would have like a MetaMask or a Rainbow wallet on your phone where you can sign transactions, and it's pretty basic in terms of what you can do. A smart contract wallet, or other folks call them smart accounts, smart wallets, are fully customizable. So you can create rules around these smart wallets. So for example, the most popular consumer smart wallet standard right now is ERC 4337, which you may have seen a lot of news about. A lot of what ERC 4337 starts with is the gas problem, which is basically, hey, with this smart account, how do you pay gas? Because an EOA end wallet at the end of the day actually needs to be the one executing gas. So how do we give a user experience where that gas is still able to be paid, but it's this programmable smart wallet where anyone can create any sort of design around that wallet? One example of this is you could let's say, have protections for specific contracts. So let's say you're storing your, life savings in the smart wallet. You've got a few $100,000 of USDC, and you want to make sure that all of that money is not sent out at once if someone malicious gets control of your smart wallet. So you could make certain rules of, hey, only 1,000 USDC can be sent out a day, 10,000 over the course of a month, as a random example.
Gotcha. And then another thing you mentioned earlier too is that a multisig is only one type of like wallet that a group of people could have to operate on chain. I know another one is MPC. You just educated me about this actually when we were off air. Multi-party computation. I have to admit I was only aware of multisigs. I've ever since day one of using multisigs. For me, I've used Gnosis saved, and that's really all I know. So tell us the difference between a multisig and an MPC or any other kind of multi wallet that multiple people can control.
So with MPC, things get a little different in how they are marketed to consumers versus to businesses and teams. Where with consumers, MPC is often the technology that's used under the hood. You may not be exposed to it directly. And often a lot of these wallet as a service providers, such as the Privies of the world, are using MPC under the hood. I'm actually not sure what Privy specifically is used, but Coinbase Wallet offers a wallet as a service offering. Fireblocks offers a wallet as a service offering. And a lot of those are using MPC under the hood. Now, what is MPC? MPC, multi-party computation. Basically, what this means is you actually will split the key across several different locations. So it still requires multi-signature. It's just that the actual EOA key itself is split instead of having several wallets that on-chain validates, hey, is this the transaction we want to execute? Now, there are pros and cons to multi-signature wallets versus MPC wallets. I'd say one of the big benefits of MPC is it's very easy to get the same address across multiple different chains. However, there are a lot of challenges with MPC. It's hard to, for example, confidently revoke one of the signing shards for MPC, because if someone has that cryptographic key and they find a way to get it off of their physical device, even if you revoke it in the software, they still might have that key. Additionally, a lot of MPC providers, particularly MPC providers for businesses, will overmarket the capabilities of the MPC and the security that gets you. So, for example, a lot of these MPC for businesses, they will typically market role-based access control. Hey, you can give someone lower down on the totem pole the ability to trade up to $10,000 a day or something like that. What they don't tell you is that that's not something that's enforced on chain. It's that, hey, this is being run by their server to verify if their shard that they have, because each of these MPC companies has a different shard of the key, if their shard should execute that transaction when they get a signature from you. However, that person with the least permissions on the totem pole still has the cryptographic shard. So it's not as secure as a on-chain audited smart contract. Rather, this is just web server code that is much more prone to issues and vulnerabilities. These systems have generally been secure. I should caveat with that. There have been not any major incidents with any of the major providers, but I think they undersell some of the security risks and some of the decision-making that you're making as part of using MPC.
Really good rundown about multisigs versus MPCs. I want to talk more about, from a user perspective, what it looks like to have good multisig security practices and also how to be a good multisig member. So having been through many multisigs over time, there are a lot of challenges that it presents, not just from a technical standpoint, but from like a social coordination standpoint. And I'm sure you've experienced a lot of these pains as well. I know for a fact that you did actually with Constitution DAO, which is what inspired you to build Den. But for me, and I'm sure for you too, a lot of it is, how do you be a good multisig signer? So how do you be somebody who actually is an active, engaged member of the multisig and doesn't have to be hounded down with, a million texts across SMS, Telegram, Twitter, Instagram. I've definitely gone down the rabbit hole and dug up people's way personal accounts outside of crypto and tried contacting them there before to get them to sign a transaction, all of these things. And so I want to start with just from an individual basis, like an individual signer basis. What does it look like for an individual signer that's participating in a multisig to have a good and secure setup?
Yeah, this is a great question, Diana, especially because after hundreds of user interviews with multisig signers, this is by far the biggest problem we hear from signers is coordinating the other signers to get your transaction signed in a timely fashion. One of our favorite feature requests of all time that we've gotten from a DeFi protocol that will remain unnamed is they would like the ability to kneecap signers that have not signed on time for their transaction. So better be careful. The other multisig signers might get violent. No, but in terms of being a good signer, I'd say there's a few things to consider here. I think one is just choosing to be responsive and knowing that becoming a multisig signer is a responsibility. I think we especially saw this in the last bull run. We still see it today where a lot of people see being a multisig signer as kind of like an honorary position, especially if you're the signer of like a large protocol on some sort of emergency functionality, as opposed to a responsibility and something that you need to be actively participating in. Would think about what you need to get that signature through. If you're using a hardware wallet, for example, to sign transactions, do you have that hardware wallet in a place that's easily accessible? If you're planning on traveling soon, make sure that either you can take your hardware wallet with you or talk to the other signers to make sure that there's enough folks that are available to sign during that period where you're traveling. So that's part of the thought around this. And I think the story you mentioned was a really good one. You referenced Constitution DAO, which was kind of our origin story for Den. And so for folks who don't know, me and my co-founder Itai were on the core team for Constitution DAO. And we had this 9 of 13 multisig. That meant there were 13 signers on the multisig, and we needed at least 9 people to sign to get a transaction executed. And we had to execute one transaction because we needed to get the funds to an exchange to convert them to fiat to be able to bid at this Sotheby's auction. They told us last second, you know what, we're not going to accept crypto, only fiat. And we were literally running around Manhattan trying to get in touch with these signers. Itai even DM'd a few of the signers' siblings on Instagram, just begging them, hey, we need your sibling to sign this transaction now. And this really felt in the category of, that honorary signer position, right? We chose a lot of people that were high credibility, high trust celebrities on crypto Twitter. And that was great for building trust in the project. But in terms of operational availability, we couldn't have chosen worse people for that responsibility. So I think that kind of all comes back to, we did get it signed on time and were able to bid on the auction. Unfortunately, we lost, but that's a whole other story. And, Den is the result of that story. But I think the big point is, be careful with who you choose to join you on this multisig and understand that it is a responsibility. And it's a responsibility you really need to think about when going about your daily life.
Okay, so I want to talk about what makes a good signer, but real quick, going back to you were talking about, making sure you have your hardware wallet with you. If you're traveling, make sure to bring that with you, all of that stuff. I was going to ask, how bad is it to not be using a hardware wallet with your multisig and to be using a hot wallet like your MetaMask?
It's a great question. And really the answer is it depends. The multisig does introduce an additional layer of security. So a few people on a multisig wallet, even if they're using hot wallets, is better than just a hot wallet. It depends. So this gets to the question of people will always ask, hey, how should we set up our multisig? How many signers should we have? What sort of wallet should they use? What should the threshold of the number of signers be? And it really depends. Anything that's super high security, definitely hardware wallets. You definitely, and actually this is in most cases, you should have more than half of the signers required for the threshold. So if you have 5 signers, you should have at least 3 of them required to execute a transaction. And then on that hardware wallet side, if you are, for example, a signer on the core treasury for a DeFi protocol, you should absolutely have a hardware wallet that is probably millions of dollars in value that you are helping secure. And just having that multi-signature wallet isn't enough. You want to make sure each of those individual keys are secured. Now, if it's something that's a little bit more temporary, let's say that you are a signer on a sub-wallet in an organization where that sub-wallet is paying vendor expenses and it only has a month worth of budget at a time. Depending on how big that budget is, I might still recommend a hardware wallet. But given the financial risk is probably less than 1% of the organization's assets, it might make sense to choose speed over security in that case and just make it a little bit easier for your signers to operate by letting them use their hot wallets for that scenario. So unfortunately, it's the worst answer of all answers, which it depends. But those are some things to think about when deciding, should you use a hardware wallet or not? And really, the numbers I used, for a DAO treasury, for example, with millions of dollars, that's all very relative, right? If this is a multisig for some of your personal holdings and, you have 90% of your net worth in there, then you should probably use a hardware wallet too, because it would really suck if someone got control of your MetaMask hot wallet and was able to drain all of those funds.
The good thing about having the multisig is in case one person's wallet gets compromised, there's still not that much that the hacker could do, right? Because you would still need, 5 out of 8 signatures or whatever your threshold is. And one person, having somebody malicious controlling their wallet won't actually be able to do that much. But maybe we can walk through a few scenarios where you can we can just talk through some hypotheticals about what would be most appropriate. So I know in some cases, I've been in a situation where I was part of a multisig where there was 1 or 2 people funding this project that we were doing, but they weren't really crypto native at all. Like it's not that they've never been on a multisig, but they didn't really even know how to use a crypto wallet. Like it was that basic. And then there were a few of us on there who were more of the operators from the crypto side working on the project. And so we were all I believe it was 6 of us were on a multisig together. Would you in that scenario recommend that people like the 2 people who were supplying the funds for our project, would you recommend that people like that not be put on the multisig? Or, if not, what would you recommend as best practices for managing people like that? Because I think from their perspective, which is a more traditional perspective, if they are essentially funding the project, they definitely deserve to have a seat on the board is kind of how they see the multisig, right? And so to not have their name on there feels a little bit not right to them. So in a situation like that, how would you recommend managing it?
There's a few things to consider here. I think part of it is how strong is your relationship between the operators and the people that are supplying the funds to this multisig. I think it's also thinking about what sort of legal protection you might have. So if you know everyone's doxed identities, for example, and it's a lot of money and you're the person that's providing that money, if you know those doxed identities, you do have the ability to use the legal system to protect yourself should something go wrong. And I think with a lot of this stuff, it's thinking about both security best practices and worst case scenarios, right? You don't go into one of these situations thinking something is going to go wrong, but you really need to go through the process of, hey, what are the possibilities for failure? And how do I protect myself against those? Just like when you're signing a legal contract of any sort, you really want to make sure that you are understanding how you're protecting yourself and making the decisions that make sense there. I think in the case of the operators, one thing I've also seen in these scenarios is, let's say there are 2 people that are providing the funds and there's 6 crypto native operators. If you do a 5 of 8, you still don't need any of their signatures from those that are providing the funds to be able to execute any transactions on chain. So if part of it is them just wanting a seat at the table, you can give them that seat at the table. You're just going to need to recognize amongst the rest of the operators, hey, you probably aren't going to get a lot of, operational work out of these other signers. And that's totally fine that you're not getting that operational work. It's just part of your planning and part of your understanding of how you're going to engage with the multisig. One example of kind of how we see this sort of thing play out with Den users is, we have these notifications in your Discord, Telegram, Slack, where we'll automatically ping folks, hey, you need to sign a transaction. And one of the features is on Discord, you can tag the folks who haven't yet signed. And sometimes it'll be configured just for the people that really are the frequent signers. So if there is someone that's there for some other purpose, maybe they need to be there for some sort of organizational hierarchy reason, maybe they're the originator of the funds, you don't need to keep them as up to date or keep them as on the leash for the operational components of work.
That makes sense. And you brought up an interesting point, which is the legal protection part. If you have all the members on the multisig are docs, they all know each other's legal identities, there's legal protections there. But that's sort of like a very trad example that I just gave. On the opposite end of the spectrum, you could hypothetically have a group of people who are maybe all anonymous or anonymous to each other. They don't know each other, but they've come together to work on this project. They have this great idea that they want to work together on. What level of trust or what are like the minimum requirements that you would recommend these people put in place in order to ensure that there are no malicious actors on the multisig in a case where no one really knows each other and maybe the people are fully anonymous and don't want their identity doxed at all?
Yeah, this is a big challenge. And I think a lot of this has to do with the challenges that we broadly face in the industry in terms of on-chain identity, and especially having that identity decoupled from like your government issued identity. One of the things I really dislike is people saying your real name, quote unquote. A lot of people have a lot of names, nicknames, and I don't think we should be considering the ones that the government uses to refer to us as our real names, rather the ones that we're identified with for tax and legal purposes. And so I think as part of that, it's just a big challenge because the on-chain identity primitives are very nascent. I think there's a lot to do in terms of looking at what is the history of this alias, right? It might not be a person that anyone knows their doxed identity, but you might see their history on chain. You might have seen their history contributing to other or similar organizations. I would also try and ensure that there is a diversity of different folks that are involved here, where it's not just the same group that has been involved with similar projects together in the past, or even, the same person with a few different Discord handles. So it's very much a case-by-case basis. The industry as a whole still has a lot to catch up with on the on-chain identity side as well.
Yeah. And then finally, on the number of multisig signers part, is there, obviously it's a case-by-case basis. It'll depend, from one scenario to the next, but is there a minimum threshold where you're like, I would never go under this number of signers? Or is there a maximum threshold where you're like, this is just a coordination nightmare that you're setting yourself up for?
We've seen a lot of nightmares. I wouldn't go higher than 10, to be honest. I think it gets a little hectic there. Let me caveat.
10 signers, so it'd be like the threshold would be what, 7 out of 10?
Yes. And I think I would caveat with that with the only situation where I would go above 10 signers if it's just like, hey, you're trading NFTs or trading meme coins with some friends. I think in those situations, like, it's not as mission critical. It's not part of like core business operations. Like, you can do what you want. It's going to be a nightmare. You can do what you want. And then for anything super important, I think a 3 of 5 is a good minimum, like a good floor. If it's something that's like a little lower value or it's a very trusted group, 2 of 3 still works. But again, I think my criteria that I kind of listed earlier is the threshold should always be more than half of the signers. So typically you'll see an odd number of signers, so like 3 of 5. If you have like 8, 5 of 8, that sort of thing. So I think it has to do more with the threshold. And then I think 3 of 5 is like a real comfortable number that we see from a lot of places.
Gotcha. That's super helpful to know. Cool. Well, I want to dive into Den and talk a little bit more about that and give people a better sense of what that is. If you are in the live chat, feel free to ask questions at any point. If you think of a question as Jonah is talking, feel free to throw it in the chat and I'm keeping an eye on it and I'm happy to ask your question live. But shifting gears to Den. So we mentioned earlier that Den was kind of born out of your experience with Constitution DAO and some of the challenges that you experienced there. Can you talk about the main pain points that Den is looking to solve when it comes to multisigs?
So to give a high level on Den, we like to bill ourselves as the fastest multisig for on-chain teams, powered by Sig, formerly known as Gnosis Safe. Really, we solve a lot of the core user experience problems that teams face. So there's a lot of different users for Gnosis Safe. And for those who are unfamiliar, it's the most popular smart wallet, multi-signature wallet, over $100 billion of assets stored in safes. I believe actually the assets stored in safe surpasses all of DeFi TVL. Just to give some context on the scale, really in terms of the user experience problems we solve, there's a lot of teams that teams specifically deal with. So one is coordinating. Like we were talking about earlier, it's hard to get everyone to sign all of your transactions. And so we solve that with recurring notifications in the channels where you already work. So Telegram, Slack, Discord, SMS. Understanding transactions is a big problem for folks, both making sure that if you're sending tokens, they're going to the right person. If you're interacting with a protocol, that you can actually understand what's going on and that you're doing the right thing, that you can have context on why is this transaction actually happening. And we solve this with decoding, with simulations that show the outcome before you execute, letting users upload descriptions, files, annotate the transactions for the other signers. Along with that, making it easy to create transactions, approval workflows for payments, since a lot of teams have a lot of payments that need to go out every month, whether that's to vendors, contributors, reimbursements. And then finally, the accounting that teams need to do. At the end of the day, your bookkeeping and financial insight. And really part of the magic of Den is because all of this data exists in one place, we can really pull it together to give you a lot of context. So when you're doing your accounting, your description from signing a transaction is right there. So you're not looking 6 months later and wondering, the hell did we do on this day? So that's kind of a high level of some of the problems we solve for teams, constantly kind of working on more, but really our goal is to be the best place for teams to operate on chain. And I think so far, we've done a pretty damn good job.
Yeah, and I absolutely, and I can speak to this a little bit because we've been using Den at Rehash for, I don't even know how long, for the last 6 months, year. I mean, for a while. And I think for us, at least for me personally, the things that I think are the features I like best are, first of all, being able to write in a human readable description into the transaction. That was like half the time with signing multi-sig transactions on Safe in the past was, it's just a bunch of gibberish. Just like if you're signing something in your EOA on MetaMask, it looks like a lot of gibberish. And you're like, okay, I'm going to click this and cross my fingers and hope that none of my money or NFTs leave my wallet once I do this. And that was kind of the same feeling I had signing multisigs as well. And so now being able to write in English sentence, like payment for this month, or payment for X, Y, or Z. Like I can see that and right away be like, okay, this is what that's for. I can sign it. I've agreed to this. Another thing that I thought was cool, obviously the notifications thing was cool, and the fact that you can choose what platform you want. So that way, especially with a bigger multi-sig group, like if you have a group of 10 people, it's hard to manage all 10 people, keep track of DMing all of them individually. And so you have this bot that automatically pings them you can set it to whatever you want, every 8 hours or every 24 hours or whatever cadence you want. And so that way it never gets missed. And it's been helpful for me too, because sometimes if I'm working on something and I see a text come through or a notification come through, I might glance at it real quick or even open it, but then not take action right away because I'm in the middle of doing something else. And then I forget about it later, right? And so with the recurring notifications, that's actually been really helpful for me to receive additional alerts when I've forgotten about the first one. So those are really cool. I also think it's really cool that Den takes care of gas. So that was another big problem that I had in past, not so much with Rehash, but in past multisigs that I've been part of. It's always been like a race to, you kind of have two scenarios, right? Like on the one end of the spectrum, you have a scenario where you can't get anybody to sign. You're like DMing them, you're DMing their siblings on Instagram and asking their sibling to sign. Like you're just so desperate. And then on the flip side of that, you have scenarios where everyone is rushing to go sign so that they don't have to be the last person to sign and have to execute and pay the atrocious gas fees on that transaction. So with Den, I think it's cool that Den just takes care of that gas fee from the multisig itself, which makes the most sense to me. You know, like why would you have individuals paying for gas when you have a multisig pool of money already that you all put together? Why not just deduct it from there? So those are probably some of my personal favorite features that I've seen. And then I think the new feature you guys just launched, the recurring payments thing, is really helpful too, because for a lot of DAOs, even for us, we have recurring payments that we need to send every month. And it would be so much easier if we could just set a recurring transaction to go out on the first of every month or the last day of every month, instead of having to remember, oh my gosh, it's April, it's May, it's a new month. Now I have to go in and reset this same transaction that, you know, is just a duplicate of the last 12 months that I've had to do.
I think those two features are really great examples that kind of highlight our process and how we think about solving user experience problems with the pay gas from safe and the recurring transaction, where we really kind of look at what are the biggest things people are struggling with from a problem perspective, not a product feedback perspective. And I'll get back to what I mean by that. And then B, what's the best way to actually solve the problem? So I think pay gas from safe is a great case study here, because we're constantly hearing from folks, hey, we want a gas reimbursement feature. And for those that are unfamiliar with multi-signature wallets, the last person that signs the transaction needs to pay the gas fee to execute that transaction. And so teams would rush to be not the last one to execute because they didn't want to pay the gas. And then you have to run this reimbursement process where everyone has to say, hey, I owe this much gas, that much gas. And then once you pay the reimbursement, someone else is still owed gas from executing that reimbursement. So it's this perpetual process. And we kept hearing from folks, hey, we want you to reimburse gas. And we kind of sat down and we're like, all right, that's solving it in the current paradigm. What would actually be the right experience for this? And that's how we came up with pay gas from safe, where instead of the last signer signing the transaction, the safe itself funds the execution of that transaction. You don't need to worry about reimbursements. You don't need to worry about spending your personal funds on executing those transactions. One other thing also I want to highlight about the recurring transactions feature, it's not just for payments. You can actually do any transaction on chain with that feature. So payments and payroll is one of the major use cases for that. There's also other use cases in terms of protocol management, claiming DeFi rewards, claiming from a vesting contract. So there's a lot of flexibility in how that can be used. And we were just seeing folks constantly redoing old transactions. And this was kind of part of an iteration cycle in Den, where for a long time, we've had a feature called reuse past transaction, where you can just click this button, it'll re-queue a transaction you did in the past. So you can kind of manually do this recurring thing. And we started with that because that solved 80% of the problem. But now by making it a automated part of Den, it makes it an even smoother experience to solving that problem of I'm doing the same thing over and over, month over month, week over week.
Yeah, 100%. We have a question from Jake in the live stream. He wants to know, how does Den make money? Are there plans for premium accounts, or what does the business model look like there?
So the primary way that we make money today is we do have the free tier for Den, and then we have paid tiers. So the free tier includes all the multisig features, the recurring transactions, payment requests, notifications, all of that is included. The paid tier includes organizational management, bookkeeping, and financial insights. And we're planning on expanding what's included in that paid offering as part of that premium tier. And additionally, we're exploring what it might look like to also introduce some transaction fee-based features. I won't leak too much alpha, but I don't think you would trade it for the world.
Oh, drop in little breadcrumbs there. Trade. Feel like I just saw a tweet recently too about Dexes. Maybe I shouldn't have said that. Another question that we have from Meg about Den is, well, first of all, how does the Den team ship so fast? And I have the same question. You know, I'm always in you and Itai's ears telling you to take a break, touch grass, leave your computers. You guys seriously ship so fast, and I don't know how you do it.
So it's funny that you say that, because you are always telling us to touch grass and take a break. And I told Hope that, and she said that sounded very off-brand for you. So maybe you're the one that needs to go take a break and touch grass.
This is what I realized. It's all relative, right? Like, I feel like I have pretty good work-life balance now compared to me 10 years ago and compared to a lot of my friends in crypto. But compared to a lot of my friends outside of crypto, they do think I work all the time nonstop. So it's all relative, but you definitely work harder than I do. I can confidently say that much.
So I think there's a few things that help us ship fast. I think part of it is just work ethic. And I think it's because we're just so excited about what we're doing every day. I think part of it is values. We take our values very seriously at Den, and all of our values are designed to help you make a decision. And I think the value that really helps here is focus on the one thing. And the idea behind that is that there's always one thing that's going to move the needle more than anything else. And so just put the rest aside. And that one thing is what's going to make the difference. I think the last thing I might want to highlight here is how we think about building and shipping products, where there's this great graphic we found online. It was so great. We actually printed it out on a poster board and it's hanging in our office. By the way, if anyone is in New York and wants to check out Den HQ and we're mutuals on Twitter or anything like that, feel free to reach out. But this poster in our office, it has two ways of building a car. And one way is you build the wheels, then you build the base, then you build the cab, and then you have a car, right? But for the first part of that cycle, you didn't have anything that was useful. For Den, the way we do it is the second way that's described on this poster, which first, you build a skateboard. Skateboard doesn't have everything that a car has, but it does solve the fundamental problem that a customer has, is getting from point A to point B faster. And then we can take those learnings from that skateboard and build a scooter. And once we build a scooter, we get them a little further. We learn a lot more about what's super important. And then we build a bike and then a motorcycle. And then finally, we have a car. And along this process, we discover a few things. And there's a few lessons we've learned over and over again. And one of those lessons is there's a lot of features that you think you're going to need that if you really shave down what you're speccing out for the product, customers don't even ask for them. We've had features that we've expected customers to request shortly after launch that we don't hear for like a year later. So I think that framework really helps with shipping fast because you really get down to the bare bones of what actually solves the customer problem. And then you let them tell you, hey, this is missing, that is missing. Can you add this? Can you add that? And it lets you solve the problem faster and then iterate towards adding the features that are actually important at a faster rate as well.
I love that. Yeah. And I just want to reiterate, double click that you've said many times now about listening to your customer, talking to your user and listening to them. And that I feel like that is something that you guys have done super, super well, especially compared to other companies in crypto, is you, and this is another thing that I'm like, how did you have time to do this? But you and Itai sat down on so many calls with users of multisigs and just asked those questions. And I think it's super impressive that you and your team is so small. It's, you and Itai, maybe a couple of others, but you guys are all devs and you've somehow been able to get a lot of user feedback in and conduct a lot of user interviews, do all your marketing yourself, like all your tweeting and everything, do all of that yourself. That to me is just absolutely incredible. And especially like listening to your users part, I've been witness to that from day one. That's how you guys started. And I think that's been really integral to your success. Is you didn't go in with this grand vision that you and Itai had and just like one track mind build towards that. You went in with, we have this vague idea, like people have challenges with multisigs. This is the vague idea, the problem that we have in mind. Let's now go talk to actual users of multisigs and hear what their pain points are and their challenges are and nail it down to, one thing to focus on at a time. So that I just wanted to double click that as like a really good secret sauce component of your success that I think a lot of others can learn from. We do have one other question from Meg. So she wants to know, what do you like / would improve about the safe ecosystem? You've already talked about a lot of things that you like about the safe ecosystem, but I am wondering, what would you improve about the safe ecosystem?
The safe ecosystem is awesome. If you're looking for somewhere to get involved, highly recommend. We are very active participants in the DAO, in the ecosystem. We're one of the larger delegates in the DAO. And we recently were co-authors on the proposal to unlock the safe token, which is currently a non-transferable locked token. It's looking like that proposal is going to pass, so it'll soon be an unlocked transferable token, making it easier for others to participate in that governance. In terms of what I would improve about the safe ecosystem, this is a hard question, just because the safe team has done such a great job of laying the foundations for the DAO to kind of take over and take the reins. I think that I am really excited about what is happening in the module side of the safe ecosystem. And for those that are unfamiliar, we are talking about Safe being a multi-signature wallet, but also more broadly a smart account. And what modules let you do is make fully customized functionality with your Safe. So let's say, for example, you want to bring on a treasury manager and let that treasury manager trade between a few different stable coins and deposit them in a few different lending markets. That's something that you could achieve with modules. Modules are not very well adopted today for good reason, right? They're technically risky. They need to be audited like any other contract. They need to be tested. They haven't been very well used in the wild. And so what I'd love to see more from the safe ecosystem is not just more module development, but more development around the ecosystem of modules. I think a great example of this is insurance around modules, where if you are using a common module, you should be able to get insurance and say, hey, I want to pay X dollars a month in case something goes wrong and my safe is drained or something bad happens from installing this module that will make my life easier, but introduce a bit of security risk. And I think by adding that insurance, you can add on that module that makes it so it's easier for you and your team to move faster, but still feel confident that if something does go wrong in that module, that you are protected.
Yeah, I would love to see that as well. I mean, I think the security piece and helping people feel confident that they are operating securely is a huge piece of not just multisig and safe operation, but crypto operation in general, I would say. So last question about Den. What is your long-term vision for Den? Where do you see Den being in another year or two?
A year or two, I don't think of as particularly long term.
I mean, typically no, but in this space, sometimes I like to say like 5 or 10 years, and that's just, I think, too much to predict in this space.
I think in the short term, so I'll talk about the short term, the next 1 to 2 years, and then the long term in terms of where we see Den going in the very long term. But the short term is, and frankly, the long term in terms of how we execute is the exact same in terms of how we've executed so far, which is just constantly talking to users, understanding their problems, solving those problems, and then seeing what's next. And there's a lot that we have already, just kind of based on our user research that we've done in terms of problems that we still need to solve for multi-sig signers to make their lives a lot easier. I think we're going to go back in like 3 months from now even and say, oh my God, it's crazy that we didn't have recurring transactions at the start of the year. That's such a critical piece of so many teams' workflows. In terms of the long-term vision for Den, the way we kind of see it in terms of the 10, 20, 40-year vision, where Itai and I think this is going and what we're building towards is we think that what a financial institution, and I don't like that word institution, but for lack of a better word, will look like in a fully crypto-native world, will look a lot more like Den, where the individual team members have a lot more control of actual assets. You're not at the behest of custodians and at the risk of some like Silicon Valley Bank, for example, and the risk that a lot of folks unknowingly undertook as part of it. So if we execute according to the vision that we want, Den will be the primary place that the largest organizations in the world are storing and managing their assets. And the way we get there is by building for the crypto native organizations of today, because the problems they have now, they will either grow into those largest organizations or those organizations moving on chain will have those exact same problems.
All right. Well, this season we are ending every episode with a can you not? And so I would love to hear a pet peeve of yours, something that you wish people would just stop doing in crypto. I can start with one and I'll ask for yours after that. But my one, can you not, for what we're talking about today is with regards to people signing up to wanting to be multisig signers, can you not beg to be part of a multisig and then never sign or participate on time? Like, right? You know what I'm talking about.
Can you not is a great question. It's not our last question, I'll remind you, because I still have their story.
Yes.
I'm not
Embarrassing story
that.
coming soon. Yep.
I think in terms of can you not let ideological purity get in the way of progress? And I think we see this with a lot of folks where it's every single aspect needs to be maximally decentralized, even if some of the technology isn't there and the user experience sucks. This is another one of our values at Den called Look Towards the Sun, which is put aside your personal ideology, your favorite technology, whatever else, and just look at the customer problem. And we're all here because of ideology. We're all here because we know that crypto will build a freer and more fair financial future. That being said, we won't get there if we are so focused on purity that we're not building and that we're not making progress, that it's not a little bit better than it was yesterday. The way that I see it is that once we get the rest of the world on our playing field, it's going to be a lot easier to continue introducing things that get us closer and closer to that grand vision of crypto. But let's move them further along step by step today.
I love it. I love that. You actually have another one too. I know you said something before about not building. Can you not build for the mainstream? Is that what you said?
Yes.
That I feel like is a spicier one because that requires more of an explanation. So I'll let you get into it.
Building for the mainstream, when people say this, often what they mean is, hey, let's speculate on the user experience that Web 2 quote unquote users will expect. Let's just build features that are around that and not really understand deeply what are the problems that people are facing. And I think the way you actually get to mainstream adoption is rather build to solve the day-to-day problems that crypto natives are experiencing. And then you will eventually iterate to the point where it is so easy for those folks to actually just use your product. One of the teams that does this really well is the Warpcast team, part of the Farcaster core team, where Warpcast does feel a lot more like a quote-unquote Web 2 product, right? And when I say that, and when a lot of people say this, it just means that it feels easy to use. But it doesn't feel easy to use because they're like, in a vacuum, what do Web 2 people want? They're looking at it and saying, hey, what sucks about this experience? And how do we fix those problems? And not just guess at what those problems are and then build something in a vacuum without talking to other people, because you're going to get something wrong and you're going to move a lot slower without getting that concrete customer feedback or even watching users use the product. Some of our greatest learnings at Den are from literally having our users screen share and stepping through the product and seeing where they click and where they don't click and what they miss and what they try to do that they can't do. And we've shipped a ton of different features as a result of those experiences.
That last part you said is a key part. I've been that person that you've watched me walk through things. And I think the problem that crypto faces is that in a lot of cases, they're a team of devs building a certain product, which is, I mean, in your case, true too. For Den, it's your whole team is devs. But what you guys have done really well is actually taking the time to understand what non-technical people and the rest of the crypto community wants. And so you'll get people like me on a screen share and be like, all right, here's the product, go. And I'll be like, wait, so do I click here? What does this mean? And it's probably stuff that you and Itai didn't even think to need to write an explainer for, because in your head, it's so obvious what this is. But for a non-technical person, maybe they see this and they're like, what, an MPC? What's an MPC, a multi-party computation? I've never heard of this, even though we've been using it on the front end all along. And I think that's a lot of people in crypto is they are building for other devs, not just for other people in crypto, but for like technical people specifically, or like super, super OGs like themselves. Yeah, that explanation makes a lot of sense once you dive into that a little bit. All right, well, I've saved 1 minute for us at the end to hear your embarrassing story about me. So we'll wrap up. I mean, I've got time if you do, but if you've got to jump, then you've got a minute to tell your embarrassing story.
No, I can go a few minutes over, although I do think it'll be quick. First off, thank you to Hope for sharing a few options with me to figure out what I wanted to share on the pod today. So we all know that our dear friend Diana here is a highly, highly competitive person. No matter what she does, very competitive, wants to be the best. And when Diana was a kid, she was a soccer player.
Oh, God, not this one.
Diana was not a particularly good soccer player. So she was super competitive. She wanted to win. She was not the best soccer player. And one day, she's in the middle of the game, and she gets the ball. And she starts kicking it and getting closer to the goal, and finally kicks it in and makes the goal. And she's so excited. She's celebrating. And she turns around, and everyone's dismayed. Her coach is yelling at her.
Okay, wait. Hold on. I did not shoot the goal. I got very close to it. My coach was screaming at me from the sidelines. Like, no one was defending me. And I was like, what's going on? And suddenly I realized I was going for the wrong goal. It was right after halftime, right after we switched sides. This was like a late game, which also speaks to the fact that even to this day, I go to bed at 9 p.m. every night and I wake up at 5. And I'm just not a night person. Like, my brain shuts down at night. I can stay up and go party or whatever, but like my brain is not on whatsoever and cannot compute basic things like which side of the fields we're playing on. But okay, fair. That's a good one. That's a good one. Was that it? Or did you have, I mean, you threatened with multiple stories, so.
I have one other story if you want me to share another story.
I think
this is another one of you being, what was it?
The people in the chat, I think, would like you to share another story.
I got to give the people what they want.
That's what we do here.
So this is another story of Diana being competitive. And for those that don't know, Diana moved around a little bit growing up and at a certain point lived in Mississippi. And one time went to this big mass sleepover in Mississippi. And I think this must have been Diana's first sleepover or an early one. But
I was like 4 or 5 at the time.
Yeah, 4 or 5 years old. In Diana's competitiveness, she didn't realize that a sleepover wasn't just about hanging out and having fun. She thought it was a competition for who could sleep the longest. So everyone was ready to go in the morning, parents picking them up, and Diana's parents get there. She's still sleeping. She's like firmly laying down, not getting up, determined to win the sleepover competition of sleeping the longest.
That's, I would say, I mean, in the moment, that felt very embarrassing for me because I was at my first community sleepover. It was all with all the kids from the neighborhood. And I wake up and literally like when I went to bed, there was just a room full of sleeping bags with kids on them, like the whole room. When I woke up, I was the only one still in the sleeping bag. Everybody else was packed. Half the kids were gone. The rest were just sitting around waiting for their parents to pick them up. And I was like so embarrassed in the moment. Like, why didn't anybody wake me up? But obviously, like, everybody was making a lot of noise. Sleep has been a thing for me. This has happened to me multiple times throughout the rest of my life, even into adulthood. But in college, this happened one time where the fire alarm went off. I was in my dorm sleeping. The fire alarm went off. I woke up. I heard it. I went outside, as you're supposed to do when the fire alarm goes off. The entire dorm was standing outside and just watching me walk out. And my friends were like, dude, you were in there? Like, what the hell? Like, why didn't you come out? And I was like, I came out as soon as I heard it. And they're like, we've all been standing here for like 10 minutes.
Oh, man. No, I get it. I sleep like a rock, too. I once woke up. I had a dream that I was falling. And I woke up midair because I had jumped out of the bed as part of my dream. So I also sleep like a rock as well.
I think it must be genetic. I wonder if your parents are like this, but my dad always tells us a story about when he was in college one time. He had the top bunk and his roommate was in the bottom bunk, and he rolled off the top bunk in the middle of the night, like while he was sleeping. And that didn't wake him up. And it woke his roommate up. So this roommate sees his body lying on the floor next to him, not moving, literally thought he had died, and then just woke my dad up and he was like, oh, and like crawled back into bed. So I feel like this is maybe a genetic thing that was just passed on.
Maybe.
Well, thank you for entertaining the audience with the embarrassing stories and keeping to your campaign promise. Few politicians do that, so you're ahead of the game already. Last thing before you go, can you just tell people where to find you if they want to follow you personally, and then also where they can go to check out more about Den?
Yeah, if you want to follow me personally, I have the same handle on Twitter and Farcaster. So that's J.I. Erlich, J-I-E-R-L-I-C-H. And you can find Den at onchainden.com or at onchainden on either Twitter or Farcaster.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Jonah. Thanks for being our first guest of season 8. Thanks for your hard work campaigning for your spot as number 1 on the leaderboard. And thanks again for entertaining the audience with these embarrassing stories. And thanks everybody for tuning in. We'll be back again next week with another episode. Thank you for tuning into this episode of Rehash. Rehash is hosted, produced, and edited by me, Diana Chen. Rehash is also supported by our community of NFT holders who curate our guest lineup each season. To get involved, head over to our website at rehashweb3.xyz and collect this episode as an NFT. Anyone who collects an episode becomes part of the Rehash community and will be able to nominate guests for future seasons. To learn more about how to become a guest on the podcast, go to rehashweb3.xyz/podcast. And to learn more about sponsoring the podcast, go to rehashweb3.xyz/sponsor. Finally, be sure to follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at rehashweb3 or on Warpcast and Lens at Rehash, and join our community on Telegram at t.me/rehashweb3. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate, review, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.